Good morning. Welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Community Church of Santa Monica. I'm Dorothy Steinecke, your worship associate for this morning. Our minister, the Reverend Jeremiah Callanday, is taking a well-earned break for the summer. This morning, we are happy to be joined by the Reverend James I. Ford. Reverend Ford has been a Unitarian Universalist minister for 30 years. He is Minister Emeritus of the First Unitarian Church of Providence. He is also a Zen Buddhist priest, the guiding teacher of the Empty Moon Zen Sangha, and is the author of several books on Zen and Buddhism. I want to acknowledge that the land where our church is located, the land where most of us live, is the historical land of the Tongva people, who lived on and cared for this land for thousands of years. 2020 is shaping up as an extraordinary year, a year that everyone who will have memories of the times before and the times after it will mark as the year when everything changed. What all those changes will be, we can't yet know. We are here in the middle of it without the vantage of history. I expect that the pandemic will make some permanent changes in how we interact with each other. I can imagine someone 100 years from now marveling that before 2020, on meeting, people used to shake hands with each other with their bare hands. Hopefully, the pandemic will cause us to make systemic changes in how we look at healthcare and public health, that it will make us realize that everyone's health is dependent on everyone else's health. Perhaps we will, at long last, deem healthcare to be a human right. Perhaps the awakening to the truth of the Black Lives Matter movement will cause equally large changes. The population as a whole, in this extraordinary time, seem to be coming to the recognition that systemic racism exists and that it cannot be allowed to continue. That changes must be made on every level: personal, structural, and societal. And people are finally willing to work to make those changes happen. Perhaps we are now at the great turning that Buddhist environmentalist Joanna Macy speaks of, where we recognize that we have come to the end of society based on industrial growth and profits, and are turning to become a society based on sustainability and reverence. Macy says, if the world is to be healed through human efforts, I am convinced it will be by ordinary people, people whose love for this life is even greater than their fear, people who can open to the web of life that called us into being. If you have a chalice near you, I invite you to light it now. And if not, please join me as I light the chalice. I light the chalice with the words of the UUA Leadership Council from 2008. With humility and courage born of our history, we are called as Unitarian Universalists to build the beloved community where all souls are welcomed as blessings and the human family lives whole and reconciled. We have just a few announcements this morning. The church board of directors meeting, which was scheduled for July 14th, has been postponed. There will not be a meeting in July. A week from today, on July 19th, there will be a nature journaling workshop at 2:30. The Science Nonfiction Book Club will meet Tuesday, July 21st at 7:30 p.m. to discuss She Has Her Mother's Laugh, The Powers, Perversions, and Potential of Heredity by Carl Zimmer. Both meetings will take place over Zoom. You can get more information from the emailed announcements and the church website. Today's service is put together by a great many people. In addition to Reverend Ford and myself, Cleo Anderson, our Director of Religious Exploration, will tell the story for all ages. Sonder Choi, our Director of Music, has organized today's music, which will be played by our pianist, Ryan Humphrey, and sung by our section leader, Chloe Vaught. Since our service has gone virtual, there are many people who helped get it on the screen, including Sonder Choi, Pam Teplitz, and Elizabeth Fuller. Please join me in saying the covenant of our church. Love is the doctrine of this church, the quest for truth is its sacrament, and service is its prayer. To dwell together in peace, to seek knowledge and freedom, to serve humankind in fellowship. Thus do we covenant with each other.
From all that dwell below the skies, let songs of hope and faith arise. Let peace, goodwill on earth be sung through every land by every tongue.
Good morning. It feels like we've been apart for so long. but I am back with a story for you this morning. So, once upon a time, a very, very long time ago, in India, there lived a king and a queen. This king and queen had a son, who they named Siddhartha. Now, when Siddhartha was first born, many, many people came to see the brand new prince. And one man in particular was an old wise man who was known for being able to tell fortunes and futures. And so they invited him to meet Prince Siddhartha. And the queen said, please, please tell us, who will our son grow up to be? The old man said, oh, your son will be strong and courageous. He shall be a king. And the king was thrilled. He'll be just like me. But the wise man also said, he may also grow up and leave everything behind because he wants to help people. Absolutely not, said the king, and he snatched the prince back from the old wise man as he held him. But from then on, the king watched Siddhartha very, very carefully. And once he reached the age of 7, the king took Siddhartha aside and said, you are going to grow up to be a great king, and there are many, many things you should know. So now you'll start lessons to become a good, strong king. And 7-year-old Siddhartha said, okay, I'll try my best. And so he was given the best professors in all the land. But you see, he didn't learn to read, or to write, or philosophize. He was taught how to ride a horse, and shoot a bow and arrow, and wield a sword strong and true, because those were the skills of a brave, brave king of the day. And so this went on for quite a while, and actually he had these lessons alongside his cousin Dev, for they were the same age and should be learning the same things by all reasoning. But after their lessons every day, Siddhartha liked to go and play in the garden, and there were all sorts of animals in the garden. Squirrels and birds and bugs. But what Siddhartha loved most were the 2 white swans that would visit every season and swim around the little lake. And for years and years he would watch them. And then one day he saw a huge flock of swans flying across the garden. But suddenly one of them dropped out of the sky. And he ran to this poor little bird, and he realized that it had an arrow in its wing. And so he talked to it gently and soothed it and removed the arrow gently and wrapped the bird's wing in a shirt and said, I'll get you back to health. Well, Siddhartha came stomping through, going, that's my bird. I'm the one that hit it. It belongs to me. Siddhartha said, absolutely not. He's injured. We have to take care of him. Dev said, hey, by all rights, I shot it. I deserve to have it. And so the boys argued back and forth, and Siddhartha said, no. Here in our kingdom, when people or animals are hurt, we help them. Dev did not care. And so back and forth again, and finally, Siddhartha said, you know what? In this kingdom, when there are disputes that can't be solved, we take them to the king. So let's go find my dad. So the boys and the bird went on a journey to find the king. And they found him in his chambers making decisions. And as the boys tried to come in, the ministers said, hey, kids, go find somewhere else to play. We're handling business. But Siddhartha said, no. We have a problem and we're here for your help. And the king said, let them in. They, by all rights, have a right to ask for help. And in fact, deep inside, he was very proud that Siddhartha knew how to handle problems. And so each boy told his side of the story. Dev said, I hit it with my arrow. It's mine. And all the ministers nodded. In the kingdom, whoever managed to injure the animal, it belonged to them, which is its own separate conversation. But the king said, well, what does Siddhartha think? And Siddhartha said, he's injured. We have to help him. not hurt him more. And suddenly, in came the wise men from when Siddhartha was a baby, and he said, well, Siddhartha's correct. You see, if the bird could talk, what do you think it would say? It would say that it would want to fly free, that it would want to swim in the lake. No animal wants pain or death. We must help this animal. The ministers looked at one another, and the king mulled it over, and even Dev looked a little contrite about the situation. And finally, the king agreed that the bird should be nursed back to health, and the boys left. The king was beginning to have his suspicions that the old man was correct. But that's a different story. Our story continues with Dev and Siddhartha going back to the garden, and Siddhartha slowly unwrapping his shirt from the bird, and Dev pouting in the corner. And Siddhartha said, you can help me nurse him back to health. We can share him. And Dev did. And so finally, one day, the wing was healed, and the bird was ready to fly free. And so they took the bird back to the lake and let him go, and suddenly that flock of birds returned, and they flew around in circles all around the boys before they flew off. And Dev said, they came back for him. And Dev said, I think they're thanking us. And as the boys watched, so did the king. And I think he knew the wise man was right.
Open my heart to all that I seek. Let me be part of the love you give. Open my heart to all that I seek. Let me be part of the love you give. Part of the love that I seek. Let me be part of the let me be part of the love you give.
We now come to that time in our service for meditation, contemplation, prayer. This is a time for us to gather our thoughts, our hearts, and to just be present. I would like to invite us for a few moments of silence. Now, silence is a mysterious thing. If we allow it, we can discover mysteries of our hearts. If we allow it, we can discover directions for our actions in life. So, with that big promise, let's sit for a moment. I personally prefer to sit with my eyes open. The Zen tradition tends to like to know where we're going. Not staring out at everything, but just let the gaze fall forward. You do what you feel is most comfortable for you. Please sit quietly for just a few heartbeats. Discover what happens when you allow the world to come to you. Just a taste. Maybe you'll like to try it again a little bit longer next time. Today's reading comes from Jeff Wilson, birthright Unitarian Universalist and professor of religious and East Asian studies at the University of Waterloo. Professor Wilson is also the author of a wonderful book, Buddhism of the Heart. He sings to our hearts. Buddhism is now an accepted path within Unitarian Universalist circles. And each year, more people are discovering the value of Buddhist spiritual practices and the holistic Buddhist view of life. At the same time, UUs are modifying Buddhism to meet their needs for a socially engaged, non-discriminatory, and democratic form of religious practice. The ties between these two traditions, one from the ancient East and the other charting the cutting edge of religion in the West, will only grow stronger and more fruitful in these coming years. There's a term in Buddhism, the world is on fire. Perhaps you have a sense of what this might mean. For me, I believe the fact of what that image is pointing to is much of the reason there are religions. I believe I can even be categorical here. All religions exist in some significant degree in response to that terrible observation. This world is on fire. Today, I want to address how two different and yet complementary responses to the reality of this burning world have met, have challenged each other, and how out of that something new and wondrous is birthing. Today, let's explore the meeting of Buddhism and Unitarian Universalism. And with that, how new possibilities are emerging, bringing hope for this poor, suffering world, giving us perspectives useful for us as individuals, and in this hard moment, particularly in this hard moment, as we seek ways to not just survive, but even to flourish. Let's see if you agree. To give this all a beginning, when there are so many possible moments that could be used to mark it out, let's start in 1844. That's when a chapter from the Saddharma Pundarika Sutra, a foundational Mahayana Buddhist text, the Lotus Sutra, was published in the Boston-based and not incidentally transcendentalist Unitarian journal, The Dial. Best I can tell, this chapter, published as the Preaching of the Buddha, was the first Buddhist text to be rendered into the English language. As a footnote to a footnote, the Preaching of Buddha was for many years wrongly credited to Henry David Thoreau. It was a reasonable enough speculation, as the chapter was published anonymously while he was editor of the journal, and he was well known to be interested in all matters Eastern. The actual translator, however, was the remarkable Unitarian thinker Elizabeth Palmer Peabody. Anonymous, as you may have noticed, is quite often a woman. From that auspicious and complicated beginning, the conversation between Unitarians, Universalists, and Unitarian Universalists and Buddhists began. But absolutely, that wasn't the only event that happened in those complex, dangerous, and often fruitful years running up to our American Civil War. For instance, the Unitarian and Buddhist scholar Jeff Wilson outlines the remarkable story of Nakahama Manjiro. In 1841, 3 years before that Lotus Sutra text appeared, is definitely another candidate for marking a beginning of this dialogue. That's when Nakahama, at the time a boy, along with several other Japanese fishermen, was caught up in a sudden storm. The fishermen were swept out to sea. They were rescued from near certain death by a New Bedford whaling ship. Unable to return to Japan, which by the prevailing Sakoku isolation laws would have led to everyone's instant execution, the ship continued on. Eventually, the crew was dropped off in Hawaii, all except for young Nakahama. Captivated by the boy's intelligence and curiosity about everything he encountered, the ship's captain, William Whitmer, took him under his personal care. They returned to Massachusetts only to find Whitmer's Methodist Church informing the family that no colored people, although they didn't actually say colored people, were allowed into the church. So they walked down the street and joined Fairhaven's Unitarian congregation. If you've never been to Fairhaven, it really is an astonishing piece of architecture, beautiful church, and I can imagine the boy being in awe at this religious tradition. And certainly with that, the boy, now known as John Mung, grew into adulthood as a Unitarian. After an adventurous life well worth pursuing in greater detail, and perhaps sometimes you might, including following his mentor as a whaler and later as a successful gold prospector, Nakahama Manjiro accumulated enough wealth to allow him to return to Japan a mere decade after he and his companions had been swept out to sea. A small footnote, on the way back he stopped in Hawaii and picked up the surviving adults from the fishing trip. Once back in Japan, he endured the now established test to prevent Christians from entering the country and contaminating it with their alien ideologies. A picture of the Virgin Mary was placed on the ground, and he was required to step on it. Up until that point, the Christians the Japanese had encountered were all Catholics, and this was a pretty good way to find them out. However, as a Unitarian, Manjiro had no problem walking on the picture. He would rise to fame and further fortune in Japan, initially through his translation of Bowditch's Practical Navigator, and with many, many other books following. Invited to the imperial court, he was eventually raised to the rank of samurai. He grew in wealth and influence. And at court, he gathered a circle of disciples among the younger courtiers. Then, in 1868, with the revolt that established the Meiji Emperor and an era of astonishing reforms, many of his disciples were recruited into leadership. Professor Wilson draws a pretty straight line from Manjiro's Unitarianism, not only to many of the era's social reforms, but also to many reforms within Buddhist sects, particularly the Pure Land School and Zen. So, as if returning the favor, the first Zen master to visit America as part of the 1893 World Parliament of Religions was the Rinzai abbot Soyen Shaku. The abbot had in his youth studied at Keio University, which had been founded by a disciple of Manjiro's. Professor Wilson argues that the Zen Buddhism taught at the university was deeply influenced by the progressive spirit of rational inquiry infused with a broad humanism that was derived directly from Manjiro's Unitarian experience. Two of Abbot Soyu Shaku's disciples, Nyogen Senzaki and Daisetsu Tatario Suzuki, would prove to be central to introducing Zen to the West. Senzaki influencing a generation of early spiritual seekers on the West Coast, introducing them to Zazen, Zen's meditation discipline, and Suzuki, most of all, as a prolific writer and translator, and through his own disciple, Alan Watts, a popularized version of this rationalist, naturalistic, humanistic Zen became the Zen most English-speaking people would first encounter. One could say to this day. What's important to distinguish here is how within religious dialogue, participants move from misunderstanding and projection to offering subtle coloring and expanded perspectives in each tradition. And sometimes within such encounters, the original traditions find themselves profoundly changed, And sometimes whole new religions emerge. Right off, I find myself thinking of how the terrible clash between Islam and Hinduism in Western India created the Sikh tradition. This place of meeting obviously is dangerous, but also is incredibly rich, run through with a riot of possibilities. I suggest something like that is happening right now. In fact, the Unitarian Universalist world has become a microcosm of world spiritual dialogue, messy, complicated, internally contradictory, and I find it wildly compelling. Some of it will come to nothing, probably most of it. Some will be silly, some is, and some may open hearts to previously undreamed possibilities. And that's what I'm interested in. There is something amazing going on. We simply need to notice. Over these past decades, as I've observed and practiced in this liminal place that is our open Unitarian Universalist Buddhist spirituality, I believe I've seen some of the contours of those possibilities as they're emerging. The list is long, starting with the Buddhist and humanist encounter, but also within our wild tradition, including Buddhist influencing of UU versions of Christianity, Judaism, and paganism. And I would be remiss to not mention the enormous possibilities for us in the Buddhist conversation with Western psychology. All of these things are important and rich and are seeping into the farthest corners of our individual and communal assumptions. As we draw to the end, one point among these many seem most important to me. Today, the large majority of Unitarian Universalists feel a deep need to be engaged in the hurt of this world. And at this moment, I suggest never more so, never more urgently. Now, in facing all the turmoil around us, some have observed that justice is what love looks like in action. Love. We UUs hold up that word love as a North Star. But what is love? What is it really? Is it in fact anything more than wishful thinking, a vague aspiration to allow us to hope in the face of so much that is ill, in the face of that world which is on fire? Well, I have a suggestion. At once as natural as can be, and at the same time an invitation into something powerful. Among the areas of mutual interest for us as Unitarian Universalists and Buddhists are the themes of an emerging theology of radical interdependence. This is where we're going to find love as meaningful, as can I say it, the deep truth of our lives. We UUs have for some time now embraced the seventh principle as a core theological insight, and justly so. In my opinion, when it is joined with the first, that holding up of an inherent worth and dignity of every individual, we get something dynamic and challenging and absolutely life-saving. And it is here that we begin to understand what love actually is. Although it remains always something we see through that famous glass darkly. That's the nature of things. We never know completely. We are always in motion, walking through the shadow. But there are ways to cast more light on the matter, to understand this sense of love that arises within us and compels us to action. For instance, we can look to Buddhism and its exploration of interdependence within texts like the Avatamsaka Sutra, the Flower Ornament Sutra, and find what we've devoted the past several decades to has been ruminated on within Buddhism for 1,000 years plus. It points to that love which informs our desire for justice. I find understanding love as an experience of radical interdependence is critical for us as we aspire to be of some use in this world. In Japan, there's a saying, vision without action is a dream. And action without vision, well, that's a nightmare. Love as radical interdependence is, or should be, our North Star. It can guide us through the dark night, and this insight, of course, has direct consequences when we think of specifics such as our ecological concerns and our viscerally felt need for economic justice, and in this moment, for many of us, so rightly, racial justice. This insight into our true intimacy is both why and it hints at how we can approach these matters. One survey suggests that some 10,000 Unitarian Universalists consider ourselves, Buddhist. And if one counts the number of those who consider Buddhism a significant influence, that number swells enormously. Twice, maybe 3 times. So something is happening. This perspective is alive and powerful, and every day it grows a little more. Now, I'm a preacher both by trade and inclination. As I draw this reflection to a close, here's some good news I want to share. In these hard times, some genuine good news. A door has been thrown wide open, and people are walking through it and toward something. I think about this burning world, and as I think about this, I feel the wisdom of interdependence particularly washed through the insights of Buddhism as the new voice of Unitarian Universalism. It is the ever so ancient and ever so present insight of love over creed, of love beyond belief. I notice this, and despite the terrible things happening all around us, I am filled with hope. Hope for us all. What is happening is that ancient wisdom of healing and guidance is reappearing in ways appropriate for our time and our place. This period of encounter, clash, confrontation, integration, and synthesis is birthing new ways for us to see and to act. One could even be forgiven for feeling some benign deity is reaching out and giving us a word of hope. It's that powerful. But actually, it is as natural as a flower opening in the morning. Right here, right now. And, oh my, not for a moment too soon. Hope for you and for me. Hope for this burning world, a song of interdependence, the song of our liberation. Amen.
This month, we are sharing 50% of our offering with the Westside Food Bank. The other 50% goes to support the life of our church. Our church has a long, ongoing relationship with the Westside Food Bank. When we were still having our services in our building, every week we took up a collection of non-perishable food items to give to the Westside Food Bank. Most of our children and youth remember trekking over for field trips on Sunday morning, where they got to help sort the food and learn about hunger in our community. Now, as many in Los Angeles are coping with unemployment and food insecurity, there are many more people turning to hunger relief organizations to meet their basic needs. The Westside Food Bank has increased its distribution tremendously, and the demand on them has increased even more. There has never been a time in memory when the food bank needed our assistance more than they do now. Please give generously to support the Westside Food Bank and the life of our church. You can now give with your smartphone. Text 844-982-0209 and put the amount that you would like to donate in the body of the text, along with the letters GCC. The first time that you give in this way, you will be asked to set it up. But after that, it will be simple. 844-982-0209.
God of many names gathered into one, in your glory come and meet us, moving endlessly becoming. God of hovering wings, womb and birth of time, joyfully we sing your praises, breath of life in every people. Hush, hush, hallelujah, hallelujah, shout, shout, hallelujah, hallelujah, sing hallelujah, hallelujah, sing God is love, God is love. God of Jewish faith, Exodus and law, in your glory come and meet us, joy of Miriam and Moses, God of Jesus Christ, Rabbi of the poor, joyfully we sing your praises, crucified, alive forever. Hush, hush, hallelujah, hallelujah, shout, shout, hallelujah, hallelujah, sing hallelujah, hallelujah, sing God is love, God is love. God of wounded hands, web and loom of love, in your glory come and meet us, carpenter of new creation, God of many names gathered into one, joyfully we sing your praises, moving endlessly becoming. Hush, hush, hallelujah, hallelujah, shout, shout, hallelujah, hallelujah, sing hallelujah, hallelujah, sing God is love, God is love.
And we come to the end of our time together. A time of silence, a time of song, a time of reflection, a time even in this somewhat attenuated way of connection, of our being together, bringing our hearts together, looking at who we are together, reflecting on who we might yet be together. And it comes to an end. We now go off into our day, our week, our lives. Many of us will come back next week. There are many rhythms to what we do. But I hope as we depart that we realize that we really are connected in profound and mysterious ways, and that what we do to one is done to all, and that what we find is that mysterious web, that mysterious garment of destiny, as Dr. King called it. And it covers us, it holds us, it contains us. And it means when we see it, that our lives can be better. We can be more healing. We can be more transformative for ourselves and this world. And my, oh my, it needs it. So, with that, let us depart in peace, and with maybe just a hint of unrest.